Hello, my name is Ilana Gersten for NUTV News. For the first time since 2018, two slates ran to be student body president and executive vice president for SGA, Northeastern Student Government Association. For the previous elections, the winning slate ran unopposed. When voting closed, the results were that the Jorio Chávez slate had won the election with 42% of the vote, beating the new Horizons Slate, who won 35% of the vote. No confidence, which indicates a voter disapproving of both slates, won 23% of the vote. This election ran into major controversy on March 28, 2022, when the parliamentarian of the SGA, Nicole Miranda, alerted the SGA Executive Board that an emergency Senate election had to be held because no slate had won an absolute majority of the student votes, based on the language in the SGA's direct election manual. This was a secret ballot vote, and the senators elected the new Horizons slate instead of the Jorio Chávez slate. Large amounts of outcry from the student body poured out on social media, and the sitting election chair resigned due to his anger over the Senate's actions. Late on March 31st, however, the SGA Executive Board issued a memo overturning the Senate election based on an interpretation of the direct election manual that constituted the meaning of the word majority to mean a simple majority, when the slate with the most voters would be considered to have reached a majority. This was the opposite of the interpretation of the parliamentarian, who interpreted the word majority to mean an absolute majority, where a slate would have to win 50% of the votes plus one. Based on the SGA's Executive Board's interpretation, which they based upon precedent in 2018, where the winning slate was elected without an emergency election after receiving 45% of the vote, the emergency Senate election was considered invalid, and the Jorio Chávez slate has been officially certified as the winners of the election. You can view the full vote totals and this memo at the link in the description. We spoke to several people involved in this controversy, including the parliamentarian, the former election chair, the Jorio Chávez slate, and the New Horizons slate to get a full perspective of the situation. To begin, I'm here in the studio with Sam Chaturvedi, the former election chair, who resigned after the SGA Senate emergency election occurred.
I got off of work and, got a call, well, not a call, but an email from the parliamentarian, Nicole, saying, okay, it looks like we didn't reach the majority that we needed, so we'll have to go into an emergency election. And I said, wait, hold up, what rule are you talking about? And she pointed out the rule in the DM that said that you would need a majority of the votes to be, elected president, vice president. And then I hopped on a call with our EVP Izzy Glenkin and our president Casey Butke to hash out what the rules would be for that, and trying to see what the correct interpretation of the document would be, because I was under the impression, and I believe both of the slates were as well, that this would have been, plurality was what they meant by that majority, basically the person that got the most votes. And turns out there are apparently multiple meanings of the word majority, depending on where you're from. So we always went into the election thinking that, Jorio Chávez got 40%-ish, 41% of the votes, so because they got the most votes, they would have won the election right there. And that's how we went into this election, thinking that that would have been the case. And the parliamentarian brought this up a couple hours before Senate, and it kind of threw a wrench into everything, and we had to act quick, act fast, and figure out what the hell was going on. So set up what would happen in our Senate and what the procedure would be, what information we're allowed to divulge to the senators before they can vote, stuff like that.
So what did you divulge?
Right, so the one big piece of information we gave them was the final vote count. That was the vote count between the three options, Jorio Chávez, New Horizons, and no confidence. And we basically put that up on like a slide and said, okay, here are the vote counts for the election, go and vote. And the parliamentarian argued that we can't give any more information than that, and argued that that might not even be allowed to give out the vote counts, but we ultimately came to a decision to give out the vote counts so that senators could use the information that this is the slate that won the student body vote. You can either vote for this or against this, depending on however you wish, and that it would be a secret ballot vote.
Why was the parliamentarian against giving the senators the student vote tally?
I don't quite remember, and I think she ended up coming around to it, but the idea was that these results weren't the final election results, so it wouldn't have been appropriate to give these election results to the senators, because the real official results would have been what the Senate ended up voting for. And there was an argument that the student body's vote might cloud the judgment of senators, but we decided that's not a sound argument. We need to get the student body's voice heard to the senators before they, go and vote their conscience.
A little bit over 8,000, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head,
like
8,000 students voted in this election, And when it came to the time for the secret ballot, it was about 83 senators. Can you talk about the result of that secret ballot election?
I myself was pretty angry at this result, and I resigned really in protest of it. Because I strongly believe that the duty of SGA was to follow the student body's voice and hold up the principles of democracy, but because of an abuse of archaic rules in the SGA Constitution and our DEM that supersede the precedent that has been followed for years and years, the new Horizons Slate that got 7% less of the vote than the Jorio Chávez slate ended up winning the election. And to me, it was a very, January 6th-esque type of situation. And I said, I can't be part of an association that let this happen.
So before the secret ballot vote happened, there was another controversy with this election.
Right.
And that was the Jorio Chávez slate being given a demerit. Can you describe a little bit about what a demerit is and why they were given one?
Right. So demerit points are basically like a 3 strikes law. Once you get 3, you're out, you're disqualified, no questions asked. So basically there were a couple posts on the NEU subreddit about how there were posters going around that weren't supposed to be around. There was one example of a poster being put on top of, I think it was a Fiji poster, and that was against CSI, the Center for Student Involvement's flyering policy, as well as flyering and postering going around in the dorms on campus, specifically in IV, which were not allowed. And at first, I thought this was pretty serious, which is why I accepted the grievance at first in terms of actually bringing it to a hearing, which is what we call giving it merit. I gave it merit because I said, hey, if you do present significant evidence that this happened, it was with malice, and it significantly altered the vote count, then I think that could merit disqualification. And I brought that to a hearing, and the New Horizons campaign had little to no evidence. First off, they couldn't prove that anybody in the Jorio Chávez campaign was involved in this because all of the members who work on the campaign did not live in Ivy, and those that did live in Ivy were out for spring break. And then when we looked at the vote counts, the line was literally flat throughout the entire, throughout whenever the violations would have occurred. So there was no significant alteration in the vote count, and that was one thing that the New Horizons Slate argued, is that one of their campaign managers, Billy Opet, he was the previous vice president, and when he ran his campaign, he said that the dorm storming, what we call it, going into dorms and giving out flyers, that was significant in getting them votes. And ultimately, we decided this happened when he did that. That was when everybody was leaving for COVID in spring 2020. So everybody was in their dorms. Everybody was, ready to leave or in the process of leaving. So that's probably why they saw a big, huge vote jump. And when we saw the day-by-day election results, which I have up on the Reddit, and I think it might be on the site, I'm not sure. But you can see for yourself that there's no change in the vote counts or the vote distribution. And they couldn't prove that anybody from the campaign did this. They couldn't prove that they saw anybody do this. And I thought, this is a bit of a bogus waste of time for everyone. And I told them as much, that they came in asking for 6 demerit points, which is the equivalent of a double life sentence, because the most you can get is 3. So after 3, you're disqualified. So they asked for 6. Because there were 2 violations, one about the CSI policy and one for dorm storming. And we said no to both. We gave them 0 because they couldn't prove anything about it. And then, of course, what happened is that they decided to appeal. I did not know about the appeal until I heard that the parliamentarian already made a decision, which is pretty disrespectful, in my opinion, of the parliamentarian, as well as the New Horizons Slate for not giving me the heads up so I could send them a memo on what my decision was and why I came to that. I wrote a 1,500 word memo talking about, in length, battling every point that the New Horizons Slate made and why me and the committee were against it. And before I could even send that over to our parliamentarian, who ended up overruling our ruling in committee, she went ahead and said, we've already ruled on it. And I was pretty angry at both the slate and her as well, because they should have waited or at least given me the heads up so I could send them my memo on time. And they said that it was a very time-sensitive hearing, and which I agree with. You only have like a 48-hour window to do the appeals. But, even a 30-minute heads up I could have given them the grievance memo. I was on co-op. I didn't have time to write it. So they went ahead and ruled to overturn our ruling in elections committee and give the Jorio Chávez slate 2 demerit points out of the 3. So they were 2/3 of the way to disqualification. And that would mean that 1 more demerit point would have gotten them disqualified.
So the parliamentarian has come up in this discussion quite a few times.
Right.
What would you have to say about her role in this whole event? And is there anything you would like to say to her?
Generally, I'm very disappointed in how she handled this. She should have recused herself from the beginning. It was very, very clear that she supported the New Horizons campaign, even if she says she didn't do that. She might say that, oh, if Sebastian asked me to be a part of his campaign, I would have joined his campaign too, which is what her argument has been. But you can say that about anything. And in these recent processes of overturning the elections, the parliamentarian was not part of the discussions, which indicates to me that the rest of E-Board and Cabinet also agree that there was some bias in her rulings. And you can see very clearly that her and members of OAB, which is the Operational Appeals Board, the other justices on that committee, were pretty biased in favor of the New Horizons slate. And it's shown very, very strongly. The first red flag was that she was part of the New Horizons campaign, and immediately after I asked her to step down, it probably would have been a good idea to ask her to recuse herself from all hearings and pass it to other members of the board. But she hadn't decided to do that. And I think the student body can take a look at the grievances and the memos that she's written and see the bias shining through, and they can take a look for themselves and see if they agree with the election committee's decision or hers, and decide for themselves that she's biased. And I think most of the student body would agree.
We did reach out to the parliamentarian for a statement, and this is what she had to say about your resignation and the events leading up to it.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be clear that this wasn't an arbitrary decision to end the election in this manner. It is clearly a stated procedure in the direct election manuals, which the election chair is in charge of overseeing, but this wasn't the first time he wanted to overlook or bypass a rule in the manual to favor the Jorio Chávez slate, and it's frustrating that it took others to point out this rule instead of him, and that is why it seems so rushed. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, as we can see by the fact that the results were overturned, it was her that was biased, not me. And I think the student body can take a look at my grievance decisions and memos as well as hers and see who's the real biased one here.
Prior to the March 31st memo, I spoke with Angelica Jorio, who was the presidential candidate of the Jorio Chávez slate, who reacted to the news of the emergency Senate election and her apparent loss. What do you think it means for SGA for the Senate to blatantly vote against what the student body had voted?
I was very mad. I was mad and saddened because it just, why are you here if you aren't here to represent the student body? Why do you think your voice matters more than the whole entire student body? It's very saddening me to see that these people voted the way they did, and ultimately the difference between the 2 slates, since there were so many people, it ended up being less than 10 people.
Why do you think SGA senators made the decision to vote for New Horizons over your slate?
Well, SGA, unfortunately, as I've come to know it, is very much a clique. You see cabinet at the end of every at the start of every meeting, they're like kind of in their own huddle, and they talk to the only people who want to talk to. And as a new senator, even as they came in, it's not welcoming, but it's very much who you know. What, like, do you go to their parties? Like, do you hang out with them? And it's unfortunately, it became a popularity contest, and we never wanted to appeal to Senate. That was never, Sebastian and I, while we've been in SGA, our point of focus was never Senate, because we knew Senate doesn't win the election. It's not Senate who needs to talk to, is the entire student body who has systematically been ignored by Senate. And this proved that once again, Senate reaffirmed that it doesn't want to listen to the student body. So I just think they went with their friends.
So we did actually reach out to the parliamentarian for a statement. I'm going to read this, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. Mm-hmm. So the statement we received said, and I'm going to quote this exactly, "The OAB came to the decision that the campaign teams were responsible for the distribution of their campaign material, and the illegal placement of the Jorio Chávez promotional materials had an unquantifiable effect on the election. The effect of the breach of rules was just the same, and it would be a dangerous precedent to set to say that rules can be broken so long as no one sees you do it." What is your response to this statement?
My response is that in the United States, there's a burden of proof, and the burden of proof is that they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we were guilty of this. And they couldn't prove any of that. Also, I just think this shows for multiple times that the parliamentarian cannot see reason for this. Can you read the first part of the statement? Sorry, I had a thought.
Yeah. The OAB came to the decision that...
Oh, yes, sorry. So the OAB, by constitution, needs to be made up of, it should be up to 6 justices with a formal majority of, I don't know what's it called, but to any hearing to have place, it should be 4 justices. Unfortunately, because of whatever reason, there were only 2 justices present and then the parliamentarian. And then there's also supposed to be a member of the administration. So if Nicole Miranda wants to be as stricter as for the rules as she seems to be, since she put a full-on argument about what majority means, and majority means something different everywhere else in the world other than the United States, as I've learned over the past 2 days. Technically, that OAB hearing was unconstitutional. On the Constitution, it clearly states you need to have 4 justices plus a parliamentarian and someone from the administrations, and she didn't follow that. We specifically and clearly asked who was present, and it was 2 justices plus herself. So I just think that shows once again the rules don't apply to her, the rules don't apply to other slates. But I think, yes, we're responsible for if we give something out and it's malicious, but we didn't have any malicious intent. We were tabling like the other slate. We thought it was important that there was some physical of the students to remind themselves to vote, because it was spring break. Like, I don't know how they wanted to vote. I don't know if I would have voted if it was spring break and I just happened to see an election. And so if she really wants to accuse us of having that, once it's out of our hands, it's like we're no longer responsible. We're the only one bound by the no dorm storming rule. The rest of the student body isn't. Yeah, they might have broken some CSI or CAPE rule that nobody really cares about. But are we really here to sanction the student body over something that, like, who did it is the question, while we're taking heat for something that has been proved that they couldn't prove we did?
So you touched on this a little bit, but because the parliamentarian was a former member of the New Horizons campaign, do you believe there was a conflict of interest?
I think absolutely there was conflict of interest. At the beginning, we had in good confidence she was part of their campaign, and she was officially part of their campaign workers. And we had to raise this issue with election chair Chaturvedi and he ultimately asked her to step down and not be part of their campaign, because she didn't see this as a potential conflict of interest. If that doesn't show that she's not able to follow the rules or read the rules correctly, that we had to come to the conclusion that it could be a conflict of interest if anything ever went to the merit or a trial, and ultimately she had the final decision. Her board and a board she chairs ultimately had the final decision, and she wasn't part of one of the 2 campaigns. I think that speaks for itself.
Is there anything about this topic that I didn't bring up that you think is really important to discuss when we talk about what happened in this SGA election?
The institution as it stands is boggled down by its governing documents. They choose and pick what rules to follow. It's very much not something that the governing docs they help, but they've been boggled down by, and rules are picked and chosen what to follow and what not. And I think that plus how they have behaved, or just completely ignoring the student body. I mean, there's been complaints before. One of the most impactful conversation I've had with the students, and why ultimately I reaffirmed my desire to run, was because I had never worked with SGA, because SGA has never wanted to work with me.
After the memo was released on March 31st, we followed up with Nicole to ask her thoughts on it, as it called her actions out twice in it. She said, "I saw the memo. I am hurt by it. I feel like I did my job and it was being ignored to avoid conflict. I think that this decision was made collectively on Monday to go through with the emergency election, and due to the negative feedback from the student body, the decision was overruled. It's not like any of our association's rules changed during that time, but holes were poked to try to invalidate. I was left out of most of these conversations, so I don't have much to say on that. I never had any bias in any of the decisions I made in this role, and I still stand by those decisions. I just don't think the parliamentarian holds much weight in anything in this current association, so what does it matter what I say at this point? People will continue saying what they want, and that's okay, but I am also just a human being, and I wish people had put more faith in my ability to do this job properly." And finally, we followed up with Nicole about the accusations of unfairness from Angelica Jorio in our interview. She wrote, "The Jorio Chávez campaign team is going to try to make me out to be biased, so be it. I didn't have any say in the OAB decisions. I literally don't have a vote on that board, so it hurts to be accused of things that have no real basis just because decisions and outcomes are unfavorable. I'm just discouraged, I'm disappointed, But I'm not making any of this personal because at the end of the day, we are all just human beings trying to do good things, and sometimes doing your job results in making people upset. After the March 31st memo was released certifying the Jorio Chávez slate as the winning slate, we spoke to Sebastian Chávez, the executive vice presidential candidate on the Jorio Chávez slate, about his thoughts and goals in his role next year.
Angelica and I have a lofty goal ahead of us. And I think I'm going to preface by saying that a lot of people are worried about the direction in which, a lot of people on the inside of the organization have expressed concern to us about the direction in which the organization might move in if Angelica and I are to take over, or when we do take over the organization next year. I want to emphasize that is a good thing, and to some extent, we want people to be maybe not even scared, but we want people to be just a little bit uncomfortable, right? With the changes that we're going to be making, in the sense that we want it to be a new experience, right? We want this to be almost like a shock. I want students to come back in, next fall and to say, this isn't the SGA that I left last semester. I want it to have a completely different structure. We want to, and I'm going to start saying we want it to have a completely different structure. Not only do we want to make it more accessible for students, we want to promote accessibility by proactively reaching out to students. So I think that's probably one of our biggest goals that we want to set out to actually achieve next year. Or I guess I have to lay the fundamental groundwork for the goals that we want to achieve next year. We don't believe that external advocacy should be something that comes as a burden to students. Students shouldn't feel the burden to come to an organization that's supposed to represent them. The representation should have the obligation to be proactively reaching out to students. And I think that's fundamentally those communications and those things, I guess, that outreach that we're going to be developing over the summer, the first 2 summer months, are what is going to lay the groundwork for next year. And I'm really, really excited for that. We want to repair the relationship that student government has with the student body. At the same time, we want to emphasize that the student government that exists next year will not be the same student government that has existed this year, nor in years prior. So I guess I'm not really sure if it's, phrasing it as rebuilding relationships or, building relationships for the first time, since it really will be an organization.
I'm Ilana Gersten, here with Ryan Lyubimov, who is the SGA senator who caused the secret ballot vote to be overturned. Ryan, thank you for joining us. On Thursday night, the SGA executive team released a memo stating that the secret ballot was an emergency election was unjustified and the original results won. We've been told that you were one of the main senators, or the senator, to really cause that to happen. Can you walk me through what you did and how that all went down?
I was reading the DEM and then the Constitution, and I noticed that there was a few loopholes that was within it because of how the emergency election is written. When you look at formatting, that was one of the main things, was that it only could be done in the fall semesters and summer semesters, and that's when the emergency elections were mentioned. And under I1 of that, because when it mentioned the time when it has to be done was A, and everything about the emergency election was I underneath it, the first had to be followed for a second one, and the way the DM functioned. And there's also other things that happened that essentially nullified, and I was like, Sam, this might actually prove what happened was wrong. It showed that what was happening was actually invalid, because we couldn't really have an emergency election in that time, and also there's other things that were at play, because nominations had to be done as well. Because when you look at the Constitution and the DM just replaces the vacancy aspect of it in the Constitution, but it does not replace all the other aspects of it. Therefore, we had to do nominations that was not followed, and that if anyone had to make a motion, no motions were allowed or points. Therefore, there was no aspect to correct what was going on or say, hey, this is wrong. On Wednesday morning, I ended up being able to speak to someone about the situation and provide my case and point out the several things that went wrong and that how the Constitution is technically wrong. And I was able to I proved it best just because when you look at how things were followed before, the way we got into emergency election was that someone tried to prove it with words, though using the same logic, using words to unprove that it shouldn't have been, because the words were proving the same way I was given there. However, words were also used to show that it was invalid, and the situation that would have occurred there's lots of situations that could have occurred if we filed it or if it was invalidated, but we had to do another one because we couldn't have done an emergency election according to the Constitution again because of the timing of it.
Lastly, we interviewed the new Horizons Slate after the March 31st memo was released about their thoughts on the controversial Senate emergency election and the subsequent certification of their opposing Jorio Chávez slate as the winners of the election. So this election was unique in the fact that for the first time in a while, there were 2 slates running. Can you tell us a little bit about your reaction when you found out that there was going to be 2 slates this year?
Yeah, it's kind of just like new and exciting. Just, we both know Sebastian a little bit better, so it was just like, oh, this is someone we know. This will be just a chance to kind of really allow the student body election to be something that hasn't been in a good few years.
And then when did you find out that there was going to be an emergency Senate election on Monday night?
I think on Monday night.
Yep. So Senate usually starts at 7 p.m. And if I'm not too off with my time, we found out between 5 and 6 p.m.
I think it was around like 5
Yeah.
p.m. There was like an emergency cabinet meeting that we went to, and then I think we both kind of excused ourselves just because
Yep.
we can't vote in cabinet anyways. So I think that was when we learned that it was a possibility,
yeah.
and then, kind of found out at the beginning of the Senate meeting when everyone's milling around.
And what was your reaction to the result of that meeting, of that secret ballot, knowing that you had won at that time, but you had received less of the student vote?
I mean, of course, it was a very difficult time because on one hand, we knew what the results of the student body elections were, but then on the other hand, we stood in Senate knowing we had won that vote. And we were definitely torn because, well, within Senate, there are a lot of people that have seen our work over the past few years that know what we're passionate about. So it was definitely a tough situation, to say the least, for everyone. But we just had to make a decision at that point, and here we are after all of that.
When did you find out about the executive team, the cabinet's decision for the memo that came out Thursday night?
I believe Tuesday night was,
No,
or Wednesday night.
It was Wednesday night
Yes,
that they had
Wednesday
that
night.
e-board met. Yeah.
Yeah,
The days all
Wednesday night
kinda
was
goes together.
when all the slates found out at pretty much the same time, so we were all on a Zoom call, and then Thursday morning, if I'm not wrong.
Thursday evening.
Thursday evening was the memo.
Yeah.
Yeah, apologies for the confusion. I
Yeah.
feel like with everything, it's just like a whole blur of time, so yeah.
What was your reaction to that memo?
I think for us, we really respect our e-board and their decision-making abilities, so we knew whatever the result of that election would have been or that meeting would have been, we would have full respect going in and going out for our e-board, for our leadership. So honestly, even when we were on the call, when we were told that this is the result of the election, we will be respecting the vote of the students, we fully respected that because we have confidence not just in our slate, but in the other slate as well. And I think our main thing is just ensuring that our association is in good hands, and we just look forward now to the future and making changes, fixing any errors that there were in our documents. So we're confident that's going to happen.
So before the whole who is the actual winner controversy happened, there was another controversy with this election over the fact that you both filed a grievance against the Jorio Chávez slate about improper distribution of campaign materials. Could you talk a little bit about why you filed that grievance?
We were informed that dorm storming has inexplicable impact on the number of votes. So we were at a stage where we thought it was extremely difficult to sort of establish the legitimacy of the votes that were cast because we could not possibly put a finger on where those votes came from. And I think in that moment, we thought that would be the best route to go through.
Can I ask why you asked for 6 demerits when 3 is the disqualifying amount?
Yeah, so the major thing there was that it was actually being processed as 2 separate quote-unquote violations. So it was kind of 3 for each of them because there's some concerns with, like school/CSI postering guidelines and a separate kind of violation with the kind of DEM dorm storming guidelines. So it kind of just ended up being accumulative, but those were 2 separate violations.
There have been claims that the parliamentarian was a little biased or had a conflict of interest in favor of your slate. Could you speak a little bit about that?
In this whole process, every individual has had their own choices and their own sort of reason for every action. So we do recognize that was something that was seen on Reddit and seen in other platforms, but I don't feel comfortable making that assumption or commenting on that because we personally were never told, oh, I'm biased towards your side or I'm going to make sure you win. There was absolutely nothing of that sort. And from the second that the parliamentarian was no longer on our team, we sort of maintained that professional boundary. That's where
we're not her.
Yeah.
And is there anything about this whole week, this whole election season, that I haven't brought up that you think it's important to talk about when we talk about everything that happened?
Moving forward, we now know what to work on, and we're all going to support each other no matter what.
To see all the sources we've used in this video, you can check the description for links. This has been Ilana Gersten for NUTV News. Thank you for watching.